Hello friends, welcome back. In this video we'll talk about the Ballad of Reading Gaol. The Ballad of Reading Gaol is a very famous poem written by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was born in 1854 and died in 1900. He was born in Dublin, Ireland, to prominent intellectuals William Wilde and Lady Jane Francisca. He also experimented with cutting-edge fashion and homosexuality. Oscar Wilde advocated the philosophy art for art's sake. Some of his famous works are Lady Windermere's Fan. Lady Windermere's Fan was published in 1892. A Woman of No Importance. It was published in 1893. An Ideal Husband. It was published in 1895. The Importance of Being Earnest. It was published in 1895 again. De Profundis, it was published in 1897, and the present poem, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, which was published in 1898. There is a story behind this poem. We need to know a few facts about the life of Oscar Wilde. In 1891, he got attracted to a beautiful young poet whose name was Lord Alfred Douglas. He was also called Bossé. Soon, the sexual nature of their relationship and friendship became public. People came to know about it. In 1895, Douglas's father, the Marquis of Queensberry, accused Wilde of sodomy. In the second trial is often referred to as the trial of the century. Oscar Wilde was found guilty of indecent acts. He was sentenced to 2 years of hard labor and sent to the Reading Gaol. The Ballad of Reading Gaol is a poetic description of Oscar Wilde's experiences in prison, especially witnessing the sentence and execution of a fellow inmate at the Reading Gaol. The poem The Ballad of Reading Gaol tells the story of Charles Thomas Woodridge. He had murdered his wife Laura Ellen Glendale and was sentenced to death. He lives his life wistfully in prison. Wilde and the other men are jealous of his attitude. In the second section, Woodridge is hanged. He accepts the death bravely. Wilde describes the terror of jail. The poem has 109 stanzas and is divided into 6 parts. Each stanza rhymes A, B, C, B, D, B. Loss, imprisonment, and emotional turbulence are the major themes dealt with by the poet in this poem. Let's try to talk about the title of the poem first. The title is The Ballad of Reading Gaol. Now we have to understand the ballad is a short story in verse. The subjects of the ballads are deeds rather than thoughts. Ballad has abrupt opening. It has impersonal treatment and repetition. So these are some of the characteristic features of ballad. There are also types of ballads like the Ballad of Growth, the Ballad of Art, and mock ballad. The Ballad of Growth is authentic ballad. It has unknown authorship. However, Ballad of Art is also called literary ballad. The best example of Ballad of Art is Coleridge's The Rime of Ancient Mariner. The Ballad of Reading Gaol is also an example of Ballad of Art or the literary ballad. It was deliberately written by Oscar Wilde. Reading Gaol. Let us understand what is Reading Gaol. The spelling of the word jail is J-A-O-L here. It's similar to J-A-I-L, but it is actually Ballad of Reading Gaol. Reading Gaol is a former prison located in Reading. It is also known as HM Prison, Reading. HM stands for Her Majesty. Reading is a historic market town in Berkshire, England. Try to understand the fact. Reading is a historic market town in Berkshire, England. So this is a place in England, this jail, Reading Gaol. It's known as Reading Gaol. This jail is situated in Berkshire in England. Let us understand what is there in this ballad. The first part of the poem describes the appearance, emotions, and situation of the prisoner. And its situation is also compared to the situations faced by other prisoners. The prisoner we are talking about is Charles Thomas Woodridge, who murdered his wife Laura Ellen Glendale and was sentenced to death, and before his death he was kept in Reading Gaol. So we are talking about that prisoner. The second part of the poem describes other prisoners' emotional reactions to his approaching death. They expect him to be depressed and self-pitying, but they are surprised to find that he is not upset and seems to enjoy the time. The third part of the poem describes prisoner's continuing indifference during his stay in the prison. The same part also describes his execution. In the fourth part, poet describes the prisoners going out from their cells and walking to the man's grave. Prison officials disrespect the corpse, but he is buried. The fifth part describes the darkness, discomfort, and other horrors of prison life. The fifth part contains several references to God and Christ. They are also used to emphasize the religious implications of the suffering of the prisoners as punishment for their crimes. The sixth and final part is summary of the poem. It mentions several important points like the disrespect of the man's grave, the inevitability of the death, and his indifference towards his death in time leading to his execution. Let's try to understand the characters in the poem. The first and foremost important character in the poem is Oscar Wilde himself. On May 25, 1895, Oscar Wilde was sentenced to 2 years in Reading Gaol for the crime of homosexuality, that is sodomy. While in jail, he encountered many prisoners. One of those prisoners was Charles Thomas Woodridge. Woodridge is the main focus of the Ballad of Reading Gaol. Charles Thomas Woodridge himself is one of the important characters. Probably he is the protagonist of this poem. That is introduced by Oscar Wilde in the opening sentence of the poem is Charles Thomas Woodridge himself. Charles Thomas Woodridge married Ellen Glendale in 1894. Woodridge, being part of the army, put a great strain on their relationship. It is a well-known fact and can be seen in the records of history. Charles slit Ellen's throat using a cutthroat razor. He was arrested at the scene. Woodridge was sentenced to death and he was to spend some time in Reading Gaol prior to his execution. It was here where Oscar met him. Charles Thomas Woodridge is the main focus of this poem. We've talked about this earlier too. Another character is Guardsman. The Guardsman is a recurring character throughout this poem. Wilde has included the Guardsman in this poem to show that all men are same. The Guardsman is described similar to the criminal as wearing the suit of shabby grey. There is another character, Trial Men. The trial men are the other men who are on trial throughout this poem. They are included to emphasize Wilde's view that all men kill the thing they love. Charles is not the only guilty man. Every man is guilty of something. The chaplain is one more character. The chaplain is a minor character. Wilde has introduced this character to show that God has forgotten the guilty men. And the last character is the governor. The governor of the prison is presented as the personification of judgment. He is described as being all in shiny black. This presents him as dark and evil, corresponding to the fate of the prisoners. Let's talk about some of the important themes dealt with by Oscar Wilde in this poem. Suffering, faith, death, and prison conditions are the four most important things that Oscar Wilde speaks about in this poem. The poem focuses on the pain a man suffers when he is deprived of his liberty. That man begins to wither away and slowly loses all hope in the future and becomes a man who waits to die. For such a person, time spent in prison becomes an endless night spent while being tormented by a guilty conscience. The poet highlights the condition of the prisoners. The man who was sentenced to die is described, while other prisoners are also described. The man who died seemed calm and free, but other prisoners were plagued by guilt and restlessness. Faith is another important theme in the poem. There is reference made towards religious faith. The poet transmits the idea that while in prison, the majority of the prisoners found their faith and returned to God. This seems to be the result of the environment they are forced to live, a place where everything is dark and where it seems that hope doesn't exist. Because of this, the prisoners are forced to look for hope in religion and pray that they may be forgiven in the afterlife. Death is also an important theme in this poem. The Ballad of Reading Gaol can be considered as being the ballad of a dying man. It tells a story of a dying man, the man who was to be executed. As a result, the poem contains reflections upon death and life and the way the idea of an imminent death affects a person's behavior. The poet uses numerous images to reflect the ugly side of death and to emphasize the feeling he felt while he was forced to see people who were just waiting to die. Prison conditions is undoubtedly the most important thing that Wilde has dealt with in this poem. The poem offers a clear description of conditions the prisoners were forced to endure while in prison. Wilde based his description on the time he spent in prison, and the description he offers paints the prison life being cruel and unjust for those trapped in it. The poet talks briefly about the food, working conditions, and living conditions the prisoners had to suffer through. I've already told you that this is a very long poem. It's a poem of 109 stanzas. Each stanza is of 6 lines, so that becomes a poem of 654 lines. It's very difficult to cover 654 lines with its introduction and the biography and analysis in one video, so we'll be needing more videos for it. So in this video, we'll just talk about the introduction to the poem, and in the next video, we'll try to read out the poem. That will be the recitation of the poem, and in the next videos, we'll talk about the analysis of the poem according to its stanzas, right from the first stanza to the last stanza. See the link given in the description box for the next video and for the next video too. I hope you've liked the information. If you've liked it, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends. Thank you very much for watching.